This video is to show how to change an oil pump on an 06D and an 06E. This is an 06E compressor, but the 6D oil pump is identical except a little smaller, different torque specifications on the outer bolts, which I will explain. The other part of evaluating the oil pump is also to evaluate low oil pressure. So first we're going to do is we're going to take the oil pump off and show how to change the oil pump. So you loosen all your bolts, you get these loose, and then you loosen the housing. And in doing the housing, you can use a scraper, or you can pry it here out, and just have to be careful not to use a hammer, especially one this size, on this area, because you can break this part of the pump. It's delicate. You loosen this up, you take this out, the plate itself on the side. It's spring loaded, so you have to be careful when you take it out that you don't drop the spring and everything on the floor. So as you take it out, hold your hand on the spring, pull the spring out, and then there's a plate, a cup that goes on there. This is the way it looks when it's in there. You take that out, and then you have the segment drive here. Now in the segment drive, there's some Allen bolts, one smaller than the other. You have a small one, which in replacing it, the torque is between 4 and 6 foot-pounds. And you have the larger one. And there's something very important to note when you're taking this apart. And it happens all the time, is two things. They have little lock washers on the ends of the bolts. See them? And it has a drive segment. The drive segment sideways has a little tube. I've seen it over and over when it's been replaced for them to put the tube into the crankshaft. That's incorrect. The tube stays outward, and that's very important. After you do that, you then remove the pump. And when you're removing the pump, you just have to be careful not to damage the surface under it on the body. What you look for when you're changing the pump is you look to see that the bearing surface is nice, clean, and straight. If it's damaged, there could be aluminum deposits on the crankshaft end, at which point, if it's not worn and it's just aluminum deposits from here, and most of the time the shafts do not get worn, you clean it up. There's one thing that's very important for you to note. These come in 3 different sizes, the standard 010 and 020. So it's important for you to use a pair of calipers and measure this, and measure it against the replacement pump to make sure it's the right tolerance. If you're dealing with low oil pressure, the worst thing you could do is take the pump off where the crankshaft's been cut 010, put a standard on. You're going to make the low oil pressure worse. You're not going to fix it. The next thing you do with the low oil pressure problem is you take your light and you shine in, and you see that make sure there's no debris, contaminants from the system in there, and the oil looks fairly clean. In most cases, you have to drain the oil, and you might have to blow in the pickup tube down to clear the oil strainer. You can't take the strainer out, but you could do that and see if you see any sediment coming off the strainer. If that all looks good, the replacement is as simple as taking it apart. The one thing you do though, you have to pull this gasket away, and when you take the gasket away, you're going to see gasket deposits. Try to use a razor first to take it off. If it's really very hard on there and you're using a scraper, do not damage the surface. It's very important. Put a new gasket, put the pump back on. When you put the pump on, you have to put it on very gingerly. So when you're putting it on, it's even and then it slides on very easily. The one thing that you have to take note, this is the oil relief. You have an oil pressure problem, you can look to see, make sure this isn't blocked. And make sure that this rotor turns. Okay, you could use a pair of pliers and turn it, you can turn it. It's hard to turn by hand, but you could wedge something in and spin it, making sure that the cam rotates. In replacing it, you put the pump back on, you line up the holes. Realize when you're doing this, the crank's going to lift up a little bit. It goes on very easily. If you have to lift the pump up, you have a problem with the rear end bearing, which means it's worn. If you have to go that far, then the machine, more than likely the compressor has too much wear, and you're not going to solve the problem. You may have to replace the compressor. And in putting it back together, you do it exactly the same way. You make certain that you take your Allen key, you put the lock washer on, you put it through the segment, and you put it back on here. One thing that's important when you're doing this, you line it up. There's a notch on the drive of the segment. And what you have to do is make sure that this is not in the way. And I set this up to show you that the segment is in the way here. So you have to, you take a little screwdriver and move the segment down. So the segment can go in and the rotor cup moves down so it fits flush. You run these in, you torque them, you put your cap over it, you make sure this gasket is clean, everything is good, there's no material here. You close this up, you tighten it, and then you torque it. The outer on the 06E is 55 to 60. If you're doing the smaller one on the 06D, it's 30 to 35. And once it's all torqued and completed, you then can run it and test your oil pressure. That completes this video.